Welcome to Pages from History, where the greatest stories of the ancient world come alive before your eyes. Today, we unveil the extraordinary tale of Nebuchadnezzar, the king who built Babylon and lost his mind. Stay with us until the final moment, for this journey reveals not just conquest and glory, but a transformation so profound it shook the very foundations of human understanding. Subscribe now and witness history as it has never been told before. First, the prince who would be king. The year was 605 BCE, and the ancient world trembled as empires clashed across the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia. In the fortified war camp near Carchemish, young Prince Nebuchadnezzar stood among his father's generals, his dark eyes burning with ambition. The Assyrian Empire had fallen, leaving a power vacuum that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian mountains. Nabopolassar, the aging king of Babylon, had sent his son to lead the army against Egypt's mighty pharaoh Necho. Battle dust rose like copper clouds as Nebuchadnezzar surveyed the enemy formations across the Euphrates River. Egyptian chariots gleamed in morning light, their bronze wheels catching the sun like shields of fire. The prince wore armor of hammered bronze, its surface etched with protective symbols and prayers to Marduk, god of Babylon. His commanders whispered doubts. Egypt had never been defeated in open battle by Babylonian forces. But Nebuchadnezzar had studied warfare since childhood, memorizing tactics in the cool shadow of palace archives. He knew that victory belonged not to the largest army, but to the mind that could see beyond the obvious. As trumpets shattered the morning silence, the young prince raised his sword and gave the command that would change history. Babylonian infantry surged forward in disciplined waves, while archers darkened the sky with arrows like a plague of locusts. The Battle of Carchemish raged for 3 days, turning the earth crimson and littering the field with broken weapons. When Egyptian survivors finally fled toward the setting sun, Nebuchadnezzar stood victorious, his destiny now undeniable. News arrived that Nabopolassar had died in distant Babylon, and generals knelt before the blood-stained prince. At 29 years old, Nebuchadnezzar had become king of the world's rising superpower. He rode back to Babylon in triumph, entering through the magnificent Ishtar Gate adorned with glazed blue lions. The city's streets overflowed with celebrating crowds who threw flowers before their young, victorious king. Second, conquest of Jerusalem and the empire's expansion. Nebuchadnezzar sat on the throne of Babylon, wearing the crown of Hammurabi's heirs, his ambitions reaching beyond visible horizons. The palace walls around him gleamed with lapis lazuli tiles depicting victories yet to come. In the west, the kingdom of Judah had dared to rebel, withholding tribute and forming secret alliances with Egypt. King Jehoiakim in Jerusalem believed mountain fortifications would protect him from Babylonian wrath. The Babylonian army marched through Syria like a bronze-tipped spear, crushing resistance in every fortified city. Nebuchadnezzar himself led the siege engines, massive wooden towers covered in wet hides to resist fire. Jerusalem's limestone walls had stood for centuries, but they had never faced engineering genius, combined with ruthless determination. Day and night, battering rams thundered against ancient stones, while arrows flew from every battlement. Inside the city, nobles debated surrender as food supplies dwindled and children cried from hunger in darkened homes. King Jehoiakim paced the palace halls, his royal robes hanging loose on a frame weakened by stress. When the walls finally crumbled in 597 BCE, Babylonian soldiers poured through breaches like water through broken dams. Nebuchadnezzar stood in Solomon's temple, examining golden vessels and sacred objects with calculating eyes. He ordered 10,000 Jews deported to Babylon, craftsmen, scholars, nobles, and the young King Jehoiakim. The captives walked in chains through desert heat, watching their homeland disappear behind clouds of dust. In Babylon, the exiled Jews were settled near the Chebar Canal, their songs of mourning echoing across strange waters. The king installed a puppet ruler in Jerusalem, but his eyes were already turning toward new conquests. Phoenician cities fell one by one as Nebuchadnezzar's fleet blockaded their harbors and his armies besieged their walls. Tyre, the unconquerable island fortress, held out for 13 years before finally bowing to Babylonian supremacy. Third, the Hanging Gardens and Babylon's Golden Age. Nebuchadnezzar stood on the palace terrace at sunset, watching the Euphrates turn molten gold beneath the dying light. His wife, Amytis, a Median princess, stood beside him, her eyes distant with homesickness for her mountain homeland. She missed the green hills of Media, the cool forests, the cascading waterfalls that sang among ancient rocks. Babylon's flat desert landscape, though magnificent in its own way, could not satisfy her longing for elevation and verdure. The king summoned architects and engineers from every corner of his empire, presenting them with an impossible challenge. "Build a mountain in the desert," he commanded. "Create forests that rise into the sky like the peaks of Media." For years, thousands of workers labored on terraced platforms supported by massive brick vaults and stone columns. Each tier rose higher than the last, creating levels like a giant staircase ascending toward the clouds. Hidden within the structure, Archimedes' screws and bronze water wheels lifted river water to the highest gardens. Complex irrigation channels distributed moisture to every terrace, creating an artificial ecosystem defying natural laws. Gardeners imported exotic plants from distant lands, cedars from Lebanon, palms from Arabia, flowering trees from Persia. Vines cascaded over balustrades like green waterfalls, their leaves rustling in winds that carried distant desert fragrances. When completed, the Hanging Gardens rose 75 feet above the palace grounds, visible for miles across the plains. Amytis walked through shaded paths among artificial hills, tears of joy streaming down her face as birds sang overhead. Nebuchadnezzar transformed Babylon itself into the world's most spectacular city, with processional ways paved in limestone. The Ishtar Gate stood 60 feet tall, its glazed bricks depicting yellow lions, white bulls, and dragons against brilliant blue. He rebuilt the Temple of Marduk, the Esagila, adorning it with gold until it blazed like a second sun at noon. The Etemenanki Ziggurat, the biblical Tower of Babel, rose in 7 terraces, its summit reaching toward the heavens. Fourth, the king's madness and 7 years in the wilderness. At the height of power, Nebuchadnezzar walked the palace roof gardens, surveying his empire spread beneath starlit skies. Pride swelled in his heart like the Euphrates in flood season, threatening to overflow every boundary of wisdom. "Is this not Babylon the Great?" he proclaimed to the night wind, "which I have built by my mighty power?" The words had barely left his lips when a divine judgment fell upon him like lightning from clear skies. His mind shattered like pottery dropped on stone, and the king who had commanded nations began to crawl on hands and knees. Court physicians rushed forward, but no medicine or magic could cure the madness descending like a dark curtain. Nebuchadnezzar fled the palace in torn robes, running toward the wilderness beyond the city's carefully maintained walls. His son Amel-Marduk assumed regency, keeping the king's affliction secret from foreign ambassadors and potential rebels. For 7 years, the greatest king in the world lived like a beast among the desert rocks and thorns. His hair grew long and matted like eagle feathers, while his nails extended into claws, cutting into his own palms. He ate grass with gazelles and drank from muddy pools, the divine image completely overtaken by animal existence. Courtiers who occasionally glimpsed him from distance reported with horror that he walked on all fours like cattle. Yet somewhere deep within the fractured mind, fragments of consciousness remained, watching the degradation with helpless awareness. He remembered palace banquets while chewing desert roots, recalled throne room splendor while sheltering beneath thorn bushes. During long nights under infinite stars, something stirred within the broken king, a dawning recognition of power beyond human achievement. Every empire he had built, every city conquered, every temple erected, meant nothing compared to the sovereignty above. Slowly, painfully, like dawn creeping across desert sands, sanity began returning to Nebuchadnezzar's tormented mind. He stood upright for the first time in years, raising his eyes toward the heavens in recognition and worship. The madness lifted like morning fog, burning away before the sun, and the king's reason returned as suddenly as it had departed. Attendants who had faithfully maintained watch from distance approached cautiously, hardly believing the transformation before their eyes. Fifth, return, reflection, and the empire's twilight. Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon transformed, his eyes carrying depths that had not existed before his wilderness years. He bathed in palace fountains, watching years of accumulated filth swirl away like dark memories in clear water. Barbers trimmed his wild hair and beard, while servants dressed him in royal purple. But the crown felt different now. The king who had conquered the world had himself been conquered by a power that reduced human glory to dust. He summoned scribes and dictated a proclamation to be read in every province from Egypt to Persia. The decree acknowledged the God of heaven as supreme over all earthly kingdoms and human achievements. Court officials exchanged worried glances. What ruler admits to madness, to crawling like beasts in desert wasteland? But Nebuchadnezzar insisted on complete honesty, desiring that his humiliation might teach wisdom to future generations. He resumed governance with unexpected mercy, releasing some Jewish captives and easing harsh tribute requirements on conquered peoples. The king who had burned temples now contributed to their restoration, seeking to balance accounts with divine justice. His reign continued for several more years, but the energy of youth had been replaced by philosophical contemplation. He spent long hours in the hanging gardens, where artificial mountains reminded him that human creation was always temporary. The ziggurat of Babel rose against the sky, its shadow falling across the palace like a sundial marking time's passage. Nebuchadnezzar understood now that even the greatest monuments eventually crumble, returning to the dust from which they arose. In 562 BCE, after 43 years of rule, the king died peacefully in his palace, surrounded by family and counselors. His son, Marduk, ascended the throne, but the empire's golden age died with its greatest ruler. Within 23 years, Babylon itself fell to Cyrus the Persian, fulfilling ancient prophecies that proud kingdoms cannot stand forever. The hanging gardens eventually collapsed, the great walls crumbled, and desert sand reclaimed the streets of glory. Yet Nebuchadnezzar's name endured through millennia, carried forward in texts and memories as a testament to human ambition. His story became legend, the king who built paradise and lost his mind, who conquered the world but found himself conquered. Nebuchadnezzar's extraordinary journey reminds us that true wisdom comes not from power accumulated, but from understanding our limitations. From the heights of empire to the depths of madness and back again, his life encompasses the full spectrum of human experience. If this epic tale moved you, honor the memory of this remarkable king by pressing the like button below. Share your thoughts in the comments. What lessons does Nebuchadnezzar's story hold for our modern world? Subscribe to Pages from History for more legendary tales from the ancient world that continue shaping our understanding today. Thank you for walking through the centuries with us, and until next time, may history illuminate your path forward.